Well, thank you all for joining us today on this webinar. United Fresh Retail Food Service Board presents Fresh Insights for Food Service Spring 2019 Trends Discussion. I'm Amanda Griffin, Senior Director of Education and Member Programs here at United Fresh. Now, before we begin, I have a few webinar logistics to review. We have allocated much of this time during this webinar for your questions. At any time during the presentation, we invite you as the participant to submit all your questions online using the chat box in the left-hand side of your screen. So take a second and locate it now. Feel free to type your question as it comes to mind, and we'll try to address it either in the moment or shortly thereafter, and definitely have a lot of time at the end for discussion. So we're going to do our best to answer all the questions, but do apologize if we are not able to respond directly to everyone on the webinar. If your question is not answered today, we will follow up directly with you via email by next week. And finally, as a reminder, today's session will be recorded. Now, I would like to introduce to you Sarah Grady, U.S. Strategic Supply Chain Manager at McDonald's. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Amanda, and hello, everyone. As Amanda said, this is Sarah Grady. I'm Vice Chair of the United Fresh Retail Food Service Board, and I'm part of the U.S. supply chain for McDonald's, where I have strategic oversight to our produce supply chain. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us on today's webinar to discuss data from Spring 2019's issue of United's Fresh Insights for Food Service publication. Just to refresh everyone's memory, Fresh Insights for Food Service is a quarterly publication from United Fresh that's produced together with Datassential. It highlights on-trend applications for fresh produce in restaurants, at retail, and meal kits, and many more. The genesis of this webinar came directly from our Retail Food Service Board during a brainstorming session. And the thought was that a webinar could be a good way to encourage more industry representatives on this publication, while also providing a forum for members to dive more deeply into each quarter's trends and ask questions. We encourage you to provide your perspective on why certain produce items are gaining traction on menus and enjoying greater consumer interest. This is our first Fresh Insights webinar, and we look forward to sharing this quarter's insightful data. Now I'd like to turn things over to Mike Kostyo from Datassential to walk us through the report.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks to the team at United Fresh for inviting me to do this. This is our first one, so I figured before we got started, I'd just give you a little overview of Datassential and who I am and who you're listening to on this Friday afternoon. So Datassential is a food service industry research firm. We're based in Chicago. This is a picture of our office right here. We also have an office in LA and then a few offices around the world as well. So if you know Datassential, you probably know us for our flagship product, which is Menu Trends. It's a database of menus from all across the U.S. food service market, now Canada, Mexico, and we're about to launch a global version of it as well. And so this database tracks menus all across the country, and it's all balanced to the census itself. So we can see what's happening on the American menu and see what's reflective of the American menu today. We actually just recently launched a service called Haiku that takes all that data and feeds it into a machine learning engine and will tell us in 4 years where we expect to see some of these ingredients and flavors on menus. So it's also a tool for flavor and ingredient prediction as well. Now we do all kinds of stuff. We do focus groups, pretty much any type of market research that you can imagine for the food service industry we cover. To give you an idea of who I am, I started with the company about 6 years ago. Actually, I think it'll be 6 years next month. So my title at Datassential is Trendologist. It's a new title for me. My more formal title is Senior Publications Manager. But what it means for me is it's my job to really stay on top of the cutting edge trends at the company. So anything early stage at the company is what I do. One way that I do that is through our trend spotting reports. So we publish 70 issues of our trend spotting magazines over the course of a year. We have 4 people on the team that publish these reports, and they cover a wide range of trends, so trends from all across the country, and then trends from around the world in international concepts and world bites as well. I also travel a lot. I go all over the country, do immersion sessions with clients, usually end those with ideation sessions, do speaking engagements, and I do webinars like this. So working a lot more one-on-one with clients, particularly in early stage trend detection and ideation. So that's just a little overview of kind of what I do at the company. And then I also oversee our custom reports. So United Fresh's Fresh Insights for Food Service was the very first custom report that we've ever done. We launched it. We're now on volume 21, so we have a long-standing relationship with United Fresh. It's one of our favorite reports to produce. It's a huge amount of information in here, but it covers, all the fresh produce from across the country and what's happening on menus in relation to that fresh produce. So it's a really wide-ranging report. So since it's the first time we've done this webinar based on this particular publication, I thought I would just go through the report, talk a little bit about how we make the decisions that we make about what goes into it, dive a little bit deeper into some of the data that's in the report itself, and then also just kind of show you how we look at some of these trends and maybe spark some insights that will be applicable to your own business. So like Amanda said, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We have a lot of information to cover, so I'm happy to answer them as we go through, and then we can answer them at the end as well. So I'm actually going to skip a couple pages ahead in the report and skip past the table of contents and letter from the editor. And this is a page that's always in the report. This is a look at Datassential's menu adoption cycle. So this is our starting point for any type of trend work that we do. This is how we look at trends and how they move through the trend cycle at the company. So I figured this is a good way to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about and the commodities that we'll talk about today. So the menu adoption cycle, and some of you may be familiar with this, but if you're not, or if you need a little refresher, trends start in inception. That's the first stage of the menu adoption cycle. That tends to be fine dining restaurants. So fine dining isn't necessarily of what we used to think of as fine dining with those white tablecloths and kind of starched tuxedos. Now it's a little bit more looser, but it is tends to be those restaurants that are higher price point. You're visiting them because you trust that chef and you want them to introduce you to something new, and you trust them to do that. So that tends to be where trends start. Then they move on to adoption. Adoption can be those chef casual restaurants. So when a chef opens up a more casual version of their fine dining restaurant, they may work with more adoption level trends. And then fast casuals will start to somewhat play in the adoption level space. Proliferation tends to be QSRs. Use a lot of proliferation level ingredients. At this point, Americans are becoming more familiar with them, and they're kind of becoming staples in our everyday diets. And then ubiquity, they are staples in our diets. Everybody loves ingredients and enjoys dishes in the ubiquity stage. It tends to be any of those operators in the ubiquity stage that menu breakfast items. So big breakfast chains, they tend to give us those comfort foods that we love and enjoy. So we can put anything on a menu adoption cycle. We track every single flavor and ingredient on the menu adoption cycle. So we have menu adoption cycles for fruit. And so you can see here things that are in inception versus things that are in adoption, proliferation, and ubiquity. So it's things like mangosteen, pawpaws, jackfruit that are in inception, moving through passion fruit, lychee, tamarind in adoption, berries, watermelon, cantaloupe in proliferation, and then oranges, strawberries, pineapples, things like that in ubiquity. And so not everything is going to move all the way through the menu adoption cycle. Some things may stay in inception, but as you move through the cycle, there's a greater chance that you're going to keep going through the menu adoption cycle and make it to that end stage. By the time you're in proliferation, it's about an 80 to 90% chance that you move into ubiquity. And so here's one for vegetables. You can see the same thing, really early stage vegetables in inception here, all the way to things that we know and love in ubiquity. And things can fall at different stages of the menu adoption cycle, depending on what type of mac we're looking at. So if this was a menu adoption cycle for ice cream, let's say, artichoke would be an inception on that menu adoption cycle because artichoke ice cream is a pretty new idea out there. So, things can fall in different places depending on the type of mac we're looking at. And so a lot of the work I do tends to focus on adoption. So this has really been the ideation and innovation engine in the industry. This is where a lot of those trends and flavors flavors that we keep seeing and keep talking about are coming from this stage of the cycle. So it's ingredients like gochujang, so that fermented chili paste from Korea, often called the next sriracha. It's things like the banh mi sandwich, the fastest growing sandwich in America right now. It's drinks like cold brew coffee, absolutely phenomenal growth, has really taken over the coffee market in the past few years, and now we're seeing those next level iterations of it, so things like nitro cold brew coffee. Farro, and just ancient grains in general, a lot of those tend to fall in adoption. And then tahini, really driven by the hummus trend, but also kind of coming into its own right now, on menus. So all of these ingredients fall into adoption. And we can track every single ingredient that's put on menus today and where it falls in the menu adoption cycle. So if we just look at all of the LTOs that were added to menus in the past 4 years, we can track where all of those fall on the menu adoption cycle. So you can see all the LTOs added to major chains in the past 4 years. It's about 20,000 altogether. About 1.33% of those ingredients in those LTOs were in the inception stage of the menu adoption cycle. About 5.64% were in adoption, 13.25% were in proliferation, and then the vast majority are in ubiquity. And so this is what we would expect to see. We're looking at chains. If we were looking at a chart like this that was looking at independent fine dining restaurants across the country, this would look very different. We would see a lot more of those inception and adoption level ingredients. And so this tells you, what your strategy would be. So whether you're trying to get an ingredient into a major chain, if it's a ubiquity level ingredient, it may be an easier sell, but it may be a little bit harder in that they already have a lot of ubiquity level ingredients. If you're trying to go after a consumer, an inception level ingredient is only going to, really resonate with those really trend forward consumers, and so your market strategy changes there. But it is changing a lot just across the industry. So if we look here, we can see how the inception stage alone has been leveraged at chains across the country. So in 2015, 1.17% of the ingredients on major chain menus introduced as an LTO in the country were in the inception level stage. In 2016, it was 1.25%, 2017, 1.4%, and last year, 1.63% of all ingredients in LTOs were in the inception level stage. And these seem like small numbers, but this is really about volume. So we're talking about chains across the country. And so when a chain decides that they're going to put something on the menu from early in the menu adoption cycle, they're introducing many consumers to that ingredient for the first time. And a lot of instances, that can actually go a long way in moving that ingredient through the menu adoption cycle. So, if a chain has 2,000, 3,000 locations and they decide they're going to add something in an inception to the menu, all of a sudden consumers across the country have access to that ingredient that they didn't before, and have access to trying it, not just seeing it in the media. And so I think in the next couple of years we'll start to see maybe 2% of ingredients in LTOs in the inception level stage, which is really, this is a huge change actually. When we used to work with chains, we would never ever talk about inception. Those things were too far out there. So in general, this menu adoption cycle is speeding up. We used to say it took about a dozen years to move through the menu adoption cycle. Now it's about half that, so it takes about 6 years if an ingredient is going to move from inception all the way to ubiquity. And if you look at the menu adoption cycle and kind of split it in half here, you can see ways of looking at ingredients. They kind of fall either to the left or right here. So if it's an ingredient or a dish that falls in inception or adoption, that's an exciting ingredient. That's you're adding it to the menu because it's going to make a consumer excited. If it's something from the right-hand side of the menu adoption cycle in proliferation or in ubiquity, that's about volume. So those are the things we know and love, things like pizzas and sandwiches. And really the holy grail of a product is one that incorporates both of these areas of the menu adoption cycle. So you take that pizza or that sandwich and you add a flavor from early in the menu adoption cycle to it. So I can get pizza anywhere, but now it has that exciting ingredient on it, so I have to come to you as a food service operator to try that item. And like I said, this menu adoption cycle, just the trend, cycle alone is moving so quickly anymore. Partly that's because of communication. We just have so much more access to information about food and to new ideas about food. And also just about, demographic changes in the country and what younger consumers want. And that's why it's so important just to stay on top of these trends and the trend landscape as it moves. And so, that's what we do with the Fresh Insights for Food Service report. It's an easy way quarterly of staying on top of that trend landscape. So I see a real quick question there that somebody just asked, what does LTO stand for? Sorry, it's a limited time offering from a chain. So anything that's on the menu for a short amount of time, a limited time offering. So let's dive into the report. I'm going to go through the report page by page, but I'm going to pull out some of the insights, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about the data that's in the report and just how we look at it and how you can use it. And so we split the report into two different sections. It's something that we did a few years ago. We split it into the current season and then the season, 6 months ahead, so 2 seasons ahead. So right now we're in the spring season, which may or may not be true depending on what it looks like outside your window right now. So we chose 2 spring commodities. We get together, the team at Datassential and the team at United Fresh to choose things from across the menu adoption cycle that we think should be covered. And so we started with apricot this time. So this is the double page spread on apricot. And so that I have a few things here highlighted that I just wanted to talk about and call your attention to. And the biggest yellow circle there is looking at menu penetration. So this is probably the stat that we are asked about the most. This is where we really start when it comes to menu adoption statistics. And so the main one is the one at the bottom there, just overall penetration across these different segments. So 4% of QSRs, quick service restaurants, menu apricots. 7% of fast casuals menu them, all the way up to fine dining. We're at over a quarter of fine dining restaurants menu apricots. And so that already tells you a lot about where apricots are and how they're used in the food industry. And then we also look at growth. So 4-year growth is kind of our go-to to see where apricots are going, and here we break it down also by all those segments. So you can see which segments it's growing in and which segments it may be falling in, and then you can build a strategy off of that information. In the center there, you can see what we talked about, where apricots fall on the menu adoption cycle, and they are in adoption, so they're in that kind of sweet spot of the industry right now. And we're seeing that in general with a lot of the stone fruits. They're really growing on menus. Particularly, you can see here in quite a few savory applications. We're seeing a lot of the stone fruits being used across the menu, not just in sweet or breakfast applications. But that's something we see constantly, is just kind of this breaking down of the flavors that maybe you used to see in only one day part. We see a lot more savory flavors in desserts now as well. Another thing that we added to the report a few years ago is that average shipping point weekly commodity price from the USDA there. So if we can get that information, we always include it, just so you have an idea of what the price looks like for that commodity right now. If we can't get that information, we do put another menu item in there for you. And so that's looking at the kind of left-hand side of this page right here. If we look at the data on the right-hand side, so we're going to look at the data for Swiss CHARD. So this is the next commodity that we covered in the spring section of the report. You can see we break it down into 2 things here. So one is regionality, and regionality is so important, as everybody I'm sure on the line knows, when it comes to fresh produce. And it's not just what's being menued in these particular regions and what's growing and falling in these regions, but we're seeing a lot of regionality focus to introduce other regions to a lot of commodities. So a great example of this is hatch chilies. So a commodity that we used to only see show up on menus in the Southwest is now showing up across the country, or in the Northeast or maybe the South, as an introduction to a flavor from that region. So that's another way of looking at regionality. The cuisine analysis there breaks down how that commodity is used across cuisine types across the country. So 18% of French restaurants in the U.S. menu Swiss chard. And so by far, it's double what the next highest cuisine is, which is just mixed ethnicity. So really driven by French cuisine there. And this tells you a lot. I mean, one, it tells you, maybe what an opportunity is if you're, selling a commodity into a type of restaurant, and you can say, hey, 1 out of 5 of your fellow French restaurants have Swiss chard on the menu and you don't. That's a great sales story. But if you're looking at, how to use Swiss chard on the menu, it's also a great opening point. We're seeing Swiss chard used in French applications. That's a starting point as far as the flavors and dishes that maybe I should incorporate Swiss chard into, and what consumers are seeing out there as well. And then by far, one of my favorite things in the report, and just in general, is menu examples overall. We work with so much data at Datassential and in the industry as a whole. It's in the name of our company. But having that menu penetration only gets you so far. At the end of the day, you do need that creativity. You need that chef coming in there and who understands how to put flavors together. And that's where you see information about Swiss chard being menued at X% turned into these dishes like you see here. And so looking at the Fresh Insights for Food Service report really gives you quarterly a really good view into what's happening across the country, across segments, across price points. You get a really good just overview of what's happening on American menus today. And then we also always cover a menu category in the report. We cover per season. And so this time we did wraps. I think we were shocked that we hadn't already covered wraps before. Wraps are, between wraps and bowls, this is really how Americans eat today for lunch. Just phenomenal growth for both of these categories across menus. And for wraps in general, I mean, just very, very, you can do so many things with them. Pretty much any type of cuisine can be leveraged in a wrap. And I want to look at just 2 things on the page here. One is the trending ingredients that we cover. So these actually come from our 1-year menu growth. So these are things that we saw spike just in the past year being leveraged in this menu category. So for wraps, it's things like spinach and avocado. And then we also look at flavors or ingredients overall that maybe are not produce options but are related and can give you a little idea of maybe what you want to do on a menu. So hummus is growing in wraps. So maybe you want to look at some of those commodity options that would work well in those hummus wraps. So maybe something like a cucumber. On the right-hand side, we also see the penetration and growth again, but in this particular menu category. So this is the top menued produce in wraps and the top growing produce in wraps. So, of operators that menu wraps, 68% of those include lettuce in at least one of their wraps on the menu. 62% include tomatoes. So, probably not surprising data here. I think, if you look at pickled onions, huge growth for pickled onions in this category. And just overall, I mean, we just see it. It's just such a great thing to have on the back of the line if you're doing any type of customizable options, just because it can go on pretty much anything. We see it in street tacos and burritos. We see it in wraps. We see it in bowls. We see it on burgers. You can pretty much use it in anything. Kale, beets, other definitely top growing produce options overall, also growing in wraps. And then let's, if you can believe it, we're going to talk about fall for a little bit. And I know some of you may actually be talking about winter already. But fall, I mean, we've really seen such a big push for fresh produce in fall. I think when you saw pumpkins start to hit, so many menus, particularly fresh pumpkins and fresh squashes, now we're really seeing a drive for growth across, produce categories in the fall season. And so there's a real need for things like persimmon. So persimmon, it was actually one of our trends to watch at the end of the year. We do 10 flavors and ingredients every year that we think should be on, the food industry's radar. And persimmon was on our list last year, I believe it was. This is something, we used to see it on menus all the time at the turn of the century. It was, quite common on menus, and now it's coming back. There's a real kind of push for persimmon again, and you can see it here where the growth is. It's definitely fine dining and casual restaurants. Right now, 6% of casual restaurants include persimmon on the menu. I did want to point out, you do see those numbers there. QSR, 101% growth. Fast casual is, 100% drop in growth. But at this point, these are on very few menus in those segments. So just adding a couple to a menu can really swing those numbers back and forth. So it's only really when you get out of that 1%, 2% range that you stop seeing those huge swings in growth. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. This is an inception level ingredient, though. It's really fine dining and really the trend forward places that we're seeing it, but I absolutely think we could see it start to move into the other segments and grow in the future. And I think part of that is just that vibrant color. If you look at that menu example in the lower left, just all those menu examples, we really see from food service operators there's such a desire for naturally occurring, colorful fruits and vegetables. Because everybody wants to Instagram things these days. We want unicorn toast and mermaid drinks, and so if we can do that in a natural way, I think ingredients like persimmon can really help the industry in that way. Our next commodity that we looked at is on the other side of the menu adoption cycle. So, common, well-known, well-loved, consumers and operators. It's in ubiquity, and it's eggplant. So the main thing that I want to focus on for eggplant is this cuisine analysis, because you can see, just how many different cuisine types eggplant is used in. So it's on 85% of Indian menus in the country, 83% of Thai, but then also Italian menus, Chinese menu. Really just across the board. An ingredient that you can use in a lot of different ways. And so we did see a little drop-off in eggplant in just the past year. But I think we're going to see it kind of come back and pop back up just because of the drive for both plant-based foods, and this is so versatile. You can use eggplants in so many different ways. I just did a report and I saw eggplant jerky sandwich being added to the menu, but also the real push and drive for Middle Eastern cuisine on menus. Baba ganoush, I know, just spiked up on menus in the past year, so I think that's really going to drive eggplant growth in the next couple of years. And then the next menu category that we look at is pancakes. And so, it was somebody on our team that talked about doing this because we've been asked about pancakes so often just in the past couple months because there's so much happening in the pancake category. And so, one thing I want to point out there is that you can see there's been a real spike in fast casual pancake menuing. And really that's because they're catching up to a lot of the other segments. And so I think you'll still see pancake growth in the fast casual segment in the next couple of years. But just a spike there, spike in breakfast overall, a lot of different chains across the country adding breakfast to the menu, new breakfast ideas to the menu, all-day breakfast options certainly. And so there's been a lot of innovation in breakfast foods overall. And two of the ingredients that we saw trending in just the past year were ube and matcha. And really two reasons for both of those. One is the color trend. Everybody's so interested in the natural colors like I was talking about, but also just the health benefits of both of these. We actually did one of these fresh insights for food service reports just on the purple trend and all of those purple ingredients that you see on menus today. And you see another one in the right-hand side there in the top growing produce section. Blue corn is another one that's growing in this category. I did want to point out too, that one of the stats that we call out is that onions have grown 23% in pancakes this year. So we went back and forth on whether we were going to include all mentions of pancakes or just breakfast mentions of pancakes, and we decided to include all mentions just to give you a wider view into this category. But so that also does include things like scallion pancakes, which is probably where this growth in onions is coming from. And then if you look at top menued produce, 8% of operators that feature pancakes include potato pancakes, and so potato pancakes is also included. But I think, again, we're seeing all of this, kind of melding between day parts and flavors, and so we see a lot more, pancakes showcasing savory flavors and vice versa. And one super trendy, pancake option you might be seeing just in the past month or so is these Japanese souffle pancakes, which are really taking the coast by storm. We've seen them pop up in New York and LA, and I think you'll start to see them more across the country. And again, it's that Instagrammability. I mean, these just look so fluffy and visual. You almost have to take a picture of that. So we're going to do a report on these just in the next couple months because we've been asked about them for a few times. And then, an opportunity that I wanted to call out is Dutch baby pancakes. We had written a report about this last year, and, a lot of Americans haven't had the chance to try Dutch baby pancakes at this point. You can see only 14% of consumers have tried them. This comes from our flavor database, which has asked consumers about every flavor and ingredient that you can imagine. And, 11% overall say they love it or like it, so that's whether they've tried it or not. But when we zero in on those that have tried it that's where we see nearly 60% who have tried it like it. So once they have the opportunity to try this item, they really enjoy it. So this could be an opportunity for a lot of food service operators to add something and introduce consumers to something that in all likelihood they're probably going to like. And then the final two sections focus on chains, and then we'll get a little bit into our view from above, which is a larger topic that we look at. But just looking at the chains really quick, so we split this into two sections. And the first on the left-hand side there is just looking at some core commodities and how they're being used across different chains in the past quarter. So this is a great way of seeing what happened in that previous quarter. For the past issue, we were looking at January to March. So we saw everything from those healthy items that were introduced in January because people were trying to be healthier at the beginning of the year to things in March that were added to the menu for St. Patrick's Day promotions and things like that. So this is a really great way to just compare how chains are menuing things. And a lot of this data actually comes from, it's our insider database, and so that's every single limited time offering or LTO, a new item or test item added to major chains. And we track this every month. And so we just look at which commodities have really been added to those chains, and then we pull out some that are really relevant to that season. So you can see from actually the first 5 months of this year, from January to May, tomatoes were the most common commodity found in those LTOs and new menu items at major chains across the country. And then the other page in that section looks at intros and LTOs, just at particular operators. So, if they were doing a particular menu, maybe they were adding an early spring menu or, a late winter menu, we'll cover that, or just any particularly interesting items. And I'm actually going to talk about two of the items on this page in a minute because they're related to this final section, which is our view from above. So this is just, either a segment that we want to focus on, and it can be any segment. It can be, a restaurant segment, it can be K through 12, it can be senior living, and then it can also just be a trend, an overall trend happening in the industry. So for this section, we decided to focus on the, personalized eating movement and just this push for personalized eating that we're seeing, and really driven by technology, has really opened up a lot of opportunities for personalized eating. And so, these stats, you never see consumers, agree to this extent. But 73% of, I jumped ahead there. You can see 73% of consumers say they want some type of personalization on menus, and they're looking for nutrition that goes beyond a one-size-fits-all approach. And then actually, so 41% of consumers overall think increased personalization is always a good thing, but that jumps to 60% for the next generation of consumers. So Gen Z and millennials, say increased personalization is always a good thing. And this can mean anything from, particular diets. Maybe I'm on a keto diet and I prefer to buy mainly local ingredients, to, kiosks and digital ordering. So, the kiosk knows what I've ordered in the past. Maybe it knows that I don't like spicy foods, and so it removes all those spicy foods from the menu for me and items featuring those spicy foods. So, this really fits into, how consumers define health and how they eat today. And so we track healthy eating over the years in what we call the great ages of healthy. So Healthy 1.0 was really, the 80s was all about taking things out of food. So it was, calling things low fat, low calorie, no carb. This was the age of snack wells. We were removing things from food, really based on weight management, and that was the real focus. Then we moved into Healthy 2.0. This was, I want foods that I feel good about eating, that make me happy about what I'm choosing. So this was terms like local and natural. So, not just about weight management, but also about, feeling good about the choices that you're making. We're still in this stage to some extent, and it's evolving into this. So not only do I want to feel good about what I'm eating, but I also want my food to do something for me. So this is about positive nutrition, performance superfoods, all those protein items. This has really been driven by protein just in the past couple of years. So Healthy 3.0 has been about those functional foods, and you can see it in some of those. So you can see here, where we are over the ages. We're concurrently in the feel-good food stage. That's almost a norm now. I mean, we see those terms like local and farm to table. Those are, almost a given on menus, and now we see the real growth of those functional foods. And we see them in, some of those examples that we covered on that chain report page. So, Jamba Juice, they put a ton of options like this on their menu. So they had a pomegranate antioxidant smoothie that they put. So it's an antioxidant ingredient in those Jamba Juice smoothies. And then Le Pen Quotidien, they had a super seed salad. So a superfood, super grain, super seeds, anything like that, another functional ingredient. And consumers really want this today. So, nearly 80% of consumers say they want restaurants to offer more foods and beverages that have functional benefits. So there's a real demand from consumers. So if this is what, healthy eating looks like now, and we're concurrently in Healthy 2.0 and Healthy 3.0, what is Healthy 4.0? And Healthy 4.0 really is about that personalization and personalized nutrition. So now I want, companies and technology to understand to, kind of a personal level, me particularly, what I'm dealing with. And it's things like DNA diets. So this is a company out of the Bay Area called Habit. They send you a kit. It's not unlike, the Ancestry.com kits and things like that. But you do take a blood sample and a saliva test. You send it back to the company, and then they give you a report that looks like this. So, you're a protein seeker. These are the hero foods that you should be eating. So, particular to my DNA, it's not just about customization. It's particular to me. And this really affects us as an industry. These types of tests are recommending what our customers should be eating and what should be on their plates. And we already do it to some extent, with a gadget that's in all of our pockets, our cell phone. A lot of the apps in our cell phones already, give us recommendations based on our personal choices. So I opened my Spotify app this morning, and I had a Discover playlist that was based on the artists I like and what I've already listened to, and that playlist is just for me. The things that are on it are, things I'll only see, and, that playlist won't look the same for anybody else. The same goes for your Netflix screen. Your Netflix screen is particular to you. And so, we'll start to see menus and, kiosks and our ordering apps start to look like that in the future as well. Delivery apps already do this to some extent. I'm driving home at night and I get a little update from my phone and it says, we know you like to order sushi on Friday nights. Would you like to order again? So, our phones are recommending based on what we've done in the past, what we should be eating today and in the future. And then any of those, health and fitness apps do the same thing as well. It's tracking based on your Fitbit. You've walked this many steps. You only have this many calories to go. So, maybe you shouldn't order that cake this afternoon or whatever it may be. Even, a lot of these apps have, they work with a lot of the food and delivery companies out there to recommend options for you. So all of this really fits into this next generation of healthy eating, Healthy 4.0, which is personalization and really what, where we're moving as far as, health goes in the industry and technology overall. And we asked, this is one of my favorite sections of the report. We always do an interview, if we're able to, and we just love talking to the chefs. They give you insights into what they're doing and what their customers want. We always ask them what trends they're seeing, and what they want from their produce supplier. And so we spoke with Brandon Hudson of Jason's Deli. They've done a lot of work, to add healthier, fresher options to the menu, and then to do a lot of personalization options on the menu. So now they have vegetarian and gluten-sensitive menus. They have a nutrition calculator on their website. You can customize absolutely anything on the menu, and then you'll get a nutrition informational sheet there that's based on what you've customized. And then you can also tell them, hey, I have these allergies or I have these lifestyle preferences, and the menu will auto-populate based on what those preferences are. So we spoke to him just a little bit about that and those options on the menu. And so overall, I think, we've just covered in 30 to 40 minutes a really wide variety of trends and commodities and, what's happening. I just hope, that you see, in this, 40 minutes or so, what's going on out there. You saw some ideas that maybe are applicable for your business, and you also have a little bit better idea about how to use this report and how to look at this report in the future. I see a couple questions have come in, and I think so. Some of these are about commodity shipping prices, and so I think there may be somebody from United Fresh who maybe has a better answer for those.
They aren't on the line, but Taylor, I see the question, and we will go ahead and get back to you right after the call. So to make sure we've got those answers for you. But I just wanted to pop in to send a reminder to everybody. If you have a question, please put it in that left-hand box on your screen, as we don't have as many at the moment. So we would love to answer any questions you have about the report.
Absolutely. And even beyond the report, if there's just something, what we've been seeing, we're happy to answer any questions. And that also goes at any time. My information can always be found at the back of the report if you have any questions about the data or anything that you're working on, through our relationship with United Fresh. We're always happy to, help out United Fresh members.
Perfect. Well, I think you must have covered everything because I'm not seeing too many questions.
It is Friday.
It is Friday. Yep. We do have a question coming in from Tim. Question is, are there synergies between fresh and frozen items on a menu?
Ooh, good question. Absolutely. And I think part of that is, so persimmon's a great example, and, we've seen a lot of the superfruits that, one I always use as an example is what's the orange berry from out of Nordic countries? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't remember the name. I'll find out the name for you. But a lot of these, options, it's harder to ship them fresh, and so we do see them frozen. And so in those options, we'll probably see them more in smoothies. And but I think the best, way to keep items fresh is to make sure that you're always adding, a fresh option. If you are using something frozen, add a couple of those, fresher vegetables or fruits to it, just to make sure, fresh always scores well with clients whenever we ask consumers, what do you most want to see, what's most important to you when you're, purchasing food, be it from food service or at retail, freshness always comes out on top. And I'm not just saying that, because we're working with United Fresh. I mean, it really is a core concern from consumers. So, if you can add that fresh option, I would absolutely say, find out a way to make them work together.
Yes, and some follow-up here is how about blueberries and then also gooseberry, question mark?
It's not gooseberry. It's buckthorn. That's what, sea buckthorn. So if you haven't had a chance to try sea buckthorn, we've seen it grow on a couple menus. It's often marketed as an antioxidant. It's an invasive species actually in Nordic countries. So they're thrilled that we can't get enough of it here. But it has a really, really thin skin on it. So it usually comes to us by the time it makes that voyage over the seas. It makes it to us frozen. So that's one example. But so if you're going to use an ingredient like that in a smoothie, a functional smoothie, maybe also add a fresh option as well.
All right, next question. How is organic affecting food service produce trends?
Great question. And so we actually have a report coming out. We update it every year that looks at healthy eating and what consumers consider to be healthy. And so organic. I think you saw it on that Healthy 2.0 screen. A lot of this is just how consumers eat today, and so they expect those words to appear on menus. And so that's what we see. It's not necessarily that we're seeing the newer, trendier options overtake organic. It's more I expect things to be organic or whatever it may be, farm to table, things like that. And then I also want it to be be functional or be personalized to me.
Perfect. In follow-up, we have IQF has had a bit of a renaissance with new product innovation. Are you seeing consumer demand growing in IQF compared to fresh?
That's a great question, and off the top of my head, I don't know that. I know I haven't done any research on the individually quick frozen, on consumer sentiment on it, but I'm sure the company has. So we're happy to send you that information.
Great, I'll connect you over with the person who asked.
Great.
Wonderful. So we don't any more questions? Feel free to type them in as we get moving through the end of the webinar here. But Mike, that's all that we have currently in the queue.
Great.
All right.
When I think, I just wanted to give a big plug. I know we're, at the end of this, we're going to mention, the conference coming up. But my colleague will be there, Nirvana Chapman. She's absolutely fantastic. She has a food science background and a pastry certificate. She's going to be on the show floor next month speaking to Chicago chefs and the future of the food service industries and the trends they're seeing. So I just want to give a little plug for Nirvana, and I hope if you're at the show you have a chance to see that discussion. I saw the chefs that may be on the panel, and I think it's going to be a really great discussion.
We are very excited about that, and we actually do have a couple questions that came in while you were speaking about the session. So one
great.
of the questions is, do you think that the time span of a product traveling from inception to ubiquity has anything to do with lack of education around a product? And if yes, what are your suggestions for best informing the consumer?
Lack of education. If anything, usually what we see is so much information being out there is what's pushing things through the menu adoption cycle. So whereas before, it was a little bit harder to find out about all of these new ingredients and what's on menus, now we see it constantly. We see it in our Facebook feeds and our Instagram feeds and what our friends and neighbors are eating, and we can watch Food Network, and all of this information is really moving things through the menu adoption cycle quite a bit more quickly, I would say.
Perfect. All right. Well, Mike, that was the last of our questions. I am now going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrew Marshall, to give us a final update.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. Today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the United Fresh Convention that's coming up June 10th through 12th in Chicago. And the food service focused programming that we have planned for those 3 days. First, on Monday, June 10th, we've got our Produce Outlook panel featuring an excellent lineup of speakers that many folks have given us feedback on or are excited about. Plus, we've got a number of education sessions taking place that afternoon focused on fresh food marketing, technology advancements, food safety, protocols for all segments of the supply chain. And then on Tuesday, June 11th, and Wednesday, June 12th, we have breakfast general sessions each morning, followed by the trade show being open from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And plenty of food service-focused content in the education sessions on the show floor. Mainly will be taking place in our main stage and stage next areas. Those are two key areas on the trade show floor that will feature expert panelists, speakers, and the opportunity to hear from colleagues on topics of interest. So for instance, on Tuesday at the main stage, we're going to be hearing from Chef Michael Stebner from Sweet Green as part of the Produce at the Center of the Plate session, a chef's perspective. Sweet Green is doing a lot of innovative things in their quick serve category with technology, with offering new produce items on their menu, local growers. So we're excited about that. Plus, in our Stage Next session on Tuesday, we've also going to be talking about, and this is something that Mike mentioned a minute ago, we've got a session called The Future of Food Service, and that'll be moderated by one of Mike's colleagues from Datassential, and we'll feature a panel of chefs from the local Chicago area. So we're really excited to be engaging food service professionals and chefs in the city where the convention will be taking place. And then on Wednesday, June 12th, education that's food service focused continues, where we'll have the 8 chefs who are the winners of our Produce Excellence in Food Service Awards program speak on a panel titled Food Service Insights from Visionary Chefs. So you'll get to meet those 8 winners, all from different segments of the food service industry, and hear about what they're doing in their various programs and restaurants. And then, of course, that afternoon, to close out the show, we've got our United Fresh Retail Food Service Celebration. And that's the official celebration where we're going to be recognizing our Food Service Award winners, those 8 chefs that I mentioned a minute ago, as well as celebrating the 25 retail produce managers who are going to be recognized, of course, for their hard work and dedication to elevating fresh fruits and vegetables in their retail stores. So lots of food service focused programming coming up at United Fresh next month, and we're looking forward to seeing everybody there. So thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome, Andrew, and thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Mike, for leading our call today, and thank you all for joining us. We will be sending out some follow-up after this call with the recording and presentation. So hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.